better. I had just graduated high school. No classes, no job, nothing to worry about for once. Honestly, it felt like the one summer where I could do whatever I wanted. And everyone knows that first stretch of summer is always the sweetest. Where I live in Wyoming, there's this thing people say is a tradition. After graduation, you and your friends drive way out into the plateaus and go rock climbing. Now, I don't know if anyone outside my school actually does this, but we treated it like a rite of passage, like you weren't really free until you did it. My friends and I had been hyping it up for weeks. Finally, the day came. It was me, Alexandra, Nick, and Jack. We'd all been close since middle school. Alex was the only one with a car that could handle the long drive, so she was the one leading us out there. It felt like the perfect way to start what I thought was going to be an unforgettable summer. Alex drove her Jeep like it was built for this moment. She loved that car more than anything, and any excuse to take it off-road, she took it. Since she didn't drink, she was always the one behind the wheel, which honestly made things easier for the rest of us. We had a cooler of beers ready to crack open once we reached the top of whatever plateau we picked. The first stop was Flaming Gorge Lookout, and it was breathtaking. One of those views that makes you realize just how wild and endless Wyoming really is. We stayed there for almost an hour, laughing, taking pictures, letting the wind whip through our hair, just feeling alive. Then we started heading back toward Road 80, cruising slow, windows down, scanning the horizon for a good climb. That's when we saw it. Off Highway 141, this massive wall of rock rose up from the earth, jagged and dramatic, like something out of a movie. It looked perfect. Not too steep, but still tough enough to feel like an adventure. Alex swung the Jeep into a gravel pull-off, dust cloud rising behind us. We tossed on our gear, stuffed our packs with drinks, and stared up at the plateau. 15 minutes of climbing stood between us and what felt like the start of the best night of our lives. The climb wasn't anything extreme, just a steady scramble with enough spots to grip and step on that even beginners like us could handle it. Alex, of course, turned it into a photo shoot, making us stop every few minutes so she could pose against the rocks. She went up first, moving with this calm confidence, while I followed close behind, then Nick, and finally Jack, bringing up the rear. By the time we all made it to the top, we were breathless but buzzing with excitement. The view was insane. You can see miles of nothing but wild Wyoming stretching in every direction. We cracked open our beers, laughing, talking about old classmates, never knowing how fast that perfect moment was about to turn dark. I was zoning out, just staring at the endless stretch of wilderness, when something snapped me back. A red pickup came flying down the highway, moving way too fast for that empty stretch of road. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then, right after it passed Alex's Jeep, it slammed on the brakes so hard the tire screeched across the pavement. My stomach sank as I watched it slowly start reversing right there in the middle of the highway, backing up toward the gravel lot where we had parked. I pointed it out to my friends, and suddenly the laughter faded. We were all just watching in silence, waiting to see what would happen. The truck turned into the lot and rolled to a stop. From that distance, we could see a man climb out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with this slow, heavy walk. At first, we tried to tell ourselves maybe he was another traveler, maybe someone just looking for a place to stretch his legs or check out the cliffs. But then, he circled around Alex's Jeep, peering into the windows like he was searching for something. He tugged at the handles, ran his hand along the frame, leaning close as if he was studying the car. That was when the air shifted. It didn't feel like a hiker or a passerby. It felt wrong, predatory. Nick finally shouted down from the plateau, yelling, "Hey!" just to make sure the man knew we were up there and the Jeep wasn't alone. The man flinched when Nick yelled, spinning around until he spotted us on the plateau. He actually waved like nothing was wrong, and for a second we thought it was over. But instead of leaving, he turned back to Alex's Jeep, pulling at the handles and pressing his face to the glass. That's when Jack shouted that we were armed. My stomach dropped. We had nothing, and bluffing in the middle of nowhere felt dangerous. The man froze, then looked up at us and shouted words that chilled me. "Me too, kiddo." He lifted something shiny, waving it in the air, and even from a distance, I knew it was a gun. My throat went dry. Then he started slamming his shoulder and elbow into the Jeep's windows, each hit echoing up the rock. Alex screamed for him to stop, and we all joined in, yelling as loud as we could while scrambling down the plateau. Rocks slipped under our shoes, hands scraped raw, but adrenaline pushed us faster than ever. Then came the sharp crack of glass breaking. My heart nearly stopped. By the time we hit the gravel lot, we were sprinting straight for the Jeep, desperate to stop him. But he turned, eyes locking on us, and raised the weapon. Sunlight caught the metal as he leveled it at our chests. No more doubt. It was a gun, and he was ready to use it. We froze and threw our hands in the air, hearts pounding so loud I could barely think. The man barked at us to toss our phones and wallets on the ground, and we obeyed without question. He never lowered the gun, not for a second. His eyes locked on us as we slowly backed away. Up close, I could finally see his face. An older white guy, maybe mid-50s? Scraggly beard, skin worn by years of sun. Nothing unique, nothing that would make him stand out in a crowd. And that terrified me even more, because it meant he could be anyone. After scooping up our stuff, he pulled out a knife and stabbed it straight into Alex's tire, the hiss of air pouring out while we stood helpless. Then, without a word, he climbed into his truck. That's when I noticed no license plates. And just like that, he drove off, leaving us stranded in the middle of nowhere. Alex was beyond furious, and I couldn't blame her. I was still shaking from having a gun pointed at me, but if I were her, I'd be raging too. This guy didn't just rob us, he ruined her Jeep and left us stranded with no way to call for help. Jack and I swapped out the tire as fast as we could, but deep down, we knew it didn't matter. By the time we hit the road, the truck was gone. We tried following in the direction he went, but there was no trace. Defeated, we turned back. Once we reached Alex's house, her mom let us call the police. We gave them every detail we could remember. His age, the beard, the red pickup with no plates, but without anything solid, there wasn't much they could do. Weeks passed, we never heard back. As far as I know, the man was never caught. What should have been one of the best nights of our summer turned into the kind of memory that sticks with you for all the wrong reasons. For months after that, I couldn't shake the fear. And I'll tell you this, no view in the world is worth feeling that helpless again. My name's Sophia, and this happened 3 years ago when I was 19. My brother Luke had just graduated from college out in California, and the plan was simple. We'd drive all the way back home to New Jersey together. He had 4 years worth of stuff packed into his apartment. Furniture, electronics, books, all of it. And there was no way he could just hop on a plane. But honestly, that wasn't the part I cared about. What really excited me was the road trip itself. A cross-country drive? That felt like the ultimate summer adventure. Instead of taking the quick route through Nevada and Colorado, Luke wanted to see more of the country he'd been reading about in school. I'd never been to places like Zion or the Grand Canyon either, so the idea of taking the southern route, chasing those big open skies and famous landmarks, sounded perfect. At least, that's how it started. Luke was dead set on renting a U-Haul instead of shipping his stuff or just selling it off and starting fresh. Typical recent grad, trying to save every dollar. The truck wasn't massive, but it was big enough that I felt like we were hauling half a house across the country. Before we left, our parents drilled one warning into us, and every travel forum we checked online said the same thing. Be careful in New Mexico. It wasn't that the whole state was dangerous, but there were too many stories about shady scams, crime in tiny desert towns, and weird encounters on the long, empty highways. My dad's voice echoed in my head. Don't stop unless you have no other choice, and if you do, only at big gas stations, then get out fast. Luke and I promised we'd avoid it altogether. The plan was simple. Fill up in Arizona, push straight through New Mexico without a single stop, and refuel once we hit Texas. It felt like a smart plan, and for a while, it gave me this false sense of safety. But looking back, I realized that no plan can really protect you when something out there already has its eyes on you. The start of the trip felt like everything we dreamed of. Zion was stunning. The Grand Canyon was even more overwhelming in person, and Arizona's wide open roads were beautiful in this unexpected way that made the drive fly by. But once we hit New Mexico, the plan unraveled fast. The U-Haul guzzled more gas than Luke had expected, and I watched the needle drop quicker than either of us had calculated. At first, we laughed it off, but the further we drove, the quieter it got in the cab. According to the GPS, the next station was still 40 miles out, and the gauge had already slipped under a quarter tank. Luke's grip on the wheel tightened, his eyes flicking between the empty desert and that fuel gauge, and for the first time on the trip, I felt the knot of worry settle deep in my stomach. Luke pulled over to double-check the map, and that's when reality set in. We had no real choice. The GPS showed a tiny town about 10 miles ahead with a gas station, and as much as we wanted to avoid stopping, running out of gas in the middle of the desert felt way worse, so we pushed forward. When we rolled into town, it looked like something out of a forgotten movie set. A few broken-down buildings, one short main street, and not a single sign of life. It couldn't have been more than a few hundred people living there, if that. The strangest part was the silence. It wasn't blazing hot that day, but the streets were empty, like everyone was hiding indoors. No travelers, no passing cars, nothing. Just us, that U-Haul, and a town that felt wrong the second we pulled in. The gas station looked ordinary at first, just a couple of pumps and a small convenience store, but the vibe was anything but normal. As Luke filled the tank, I could feel eyes on us. A few locals lingered nearby, staring too long. not smiling, just watching. It wasn't aggressive, but it made my skin crawl. One man leaning against the source smoked a cigarette and never broke eye contact, no matter how many times I looked away. I kept telling myself it was only because we stood out, two kids in a U-Haul with California plates, but that didn't stop the knot in my stomach from tightening. When Luke finished fueling, I thought relief was right there. All we had to do was get back on the highway. But every turn we made seemed wrong. We could literally see the highway from certain streets, yet somehow every road led us deeper into that empty town, like we were being pulled in circles. It was the weirdest thing. Every time we tried heading toward the highway, the road would twist, dead end, or dump us somewhere completely different, like the town itself was designed to trap us. I know how crazy that sounds, but that's exactly how it felt. And before anyone asks why we didn't just follow GPS, trust me, we tried. The problem was, the map hadn't been updated in years. It kept rerouting us down roads that didn't even exist anymore, or were blocked off completely. To make things worse, our signal barely worked. We'd get a tiny blip of connection, then minutes of nothing, the screen frozen with no directions. We circled the same few blocks over and over until I felt my chest tightening with anxiety.
Deep male voice, calm and steady tone, slightly raspy, mysterious and chilling, with subtle pauses after scary details. Speak as if telling a true horror story in a detached, emotionless manner. Luke gripped the wheel, pretending to stay calm, but I could see his jaw clenched, the frustration boiling just under the surface. The more we drove, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't just being lost, it was like the whole town was pushing us away, like we weren't supposed to be there. Seeing the highway so close, just beyond the line of buildings, and never actually reaching it was maddening. It felt unnatural, almost like something or someone was making sure we stayed inside.
After almost 20 minutes of circling the same streets, Luke finally snapped. He said we had no choice but to head back to the gas station and ask for directions the old-fashioned way. I begged him not to, but he yelled that we were stuck in the very place we'd been warned about. I stayed quiet after that, seeing the fear in his eyes. When we pulled in, Luke went inside while I waited in the van, every second stretching longer. When he came back, his face told me everything. Something wasn't right. He said the clerk gave him directions, but they made no sense. Supposedly, we needed to drive 17 miles away from the highway into desert backroads, then loop back to an on-ramp. I couldn't believe it. We could literally see the highway. Why take the long way? Luke said the guy seemed friendly, but almost too friendly, like he was forcing it. He was oddly confident about those directions, and even asked questions that had nothing to do with driving. Where we were headed, how long we'd been traveling, if it was just the two of us. Hearing that sent chills through me. Before I could say anything, Luke gripped the wheel and muttered, "I don't trust this at all. We need to get the hell out of here." Luke didn't argue this time. He just drove, and I kept quiet. After a few minutes, he pulled onto a quiet side street, trying to figure out what to do next. The GPS was useless, cutting in and out, and panic was building in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling something terrible was about to happen. And right then, like on cue, a dusty pickup pulled up beside us. My heart dropped. I looked at Luke, and from the way his hands tightened on the wheel, I knew he was ready to floor it if things went bad. The window rolled down, and the driver asked if we were lost or broken down. His tone was calm, but the tension was thick. Luke stared at him for a few seconds before answering, like he was trying to decide if we were safe. I sat frozen, forcing myself to breathe. Luke finally said we were looking for the highway, and even mentioned the directions the gas station clerk had given him. The man's tone changed instantly. He got serious and told us flat out we should never take that route. It would lead us into a desolate stretch of desert known as a drug-running hotspot, the kind of place where people didn't just vanish by accident. Hearing that made my stomach turn. He quickly gave us alternate directions back to the highway and even said it was a miracle we hadn't been robbed already, driving around in a U-Haul like a moving target. Before we could thank him, he rolled up his window and drove off. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but the message was clear. We had just come dangerously close to something far worse than being lost. Luke finally started the engine again, following the man's directions word for word, and we didn't look back. Sure enough, about a mile outside town, we found the gravel road the man had mentioned. It was hidden, the kind of turn you'd miss if you weren't searching for it. The road itself was rough, winding through empty desert, and it felt like the last place on earth that should lead to safety. But after following it for what felt like forever, it actually brought us back to the highway. Just like that, the nightmare was behind us. Luke and I barely spoke about it in the moment. We didn't need to. The silence said enough. Now, years later, we laugh when the story comes up, and our family asks us to retell it every so often. But back then, it was the most unsettling thing either of us had ever lived through. I'll never forget the atmosphere of that town, the way dread and unease mixed in my chest until it was hard to breathe. My brother once called it a kind of breathless limbo, like being on the edge of suffocation without it ever fully happening. And honestly, that's the best way to describe it. I never want to feel that again. This happened about 5 summers ago. At the time, I was with my girlfriend. We'll just call her PS. She had just graduated from college and I had finished the year before. We're not together anymore, but there's no bad blood, and honestly, I don't regret a single moment of what we had. PS was mixed, half Croatian and half Brazilian, and ever since we started dating, we talked about taking a trip through Europe once school was behind us. And if there's one thing you should know about her, it's that when she set her mind on something, she was unstoppable. I used to joke that it was her fiery Latin blood, but that was just who she was. Determined, passionate, unwilling to back down. So the second she graduated, we began planning the summer vacation we'd been dreaming about for years. There was one huge problem though. We were broke. Like, really broke. That meant we had to make the trip work on a shoestring budget. Still, PS pushed for an ambitious plan. A week in Croatia, ending with 2 nights in Rijeka, her grandparents' hometown. She had never been there herself, but she grew up hearing her grandmother's stories, and she was determined to finally see it with her own eyes. I could tell PS was thrilled to finally see the place her family came from. Because we were broke, we couldn't even think about nice hotels or cozy guest houses. Instead, we booked the cheapest Airbnbs and travel lodges we could find, the kind of places with 1-star reviews and photos so grainy they looked like they were taken with an old flip phone. But we didn't care, we were just happy to be there. Zagreb was beautiful and Dubrovnik honestly blew me away. Even with no money, the streets were full of life, tourists everywhere, and it was easy to find cheap food and free things to do. But Rijeka was different. The city sat on the northern coast, a working port that wasn't built around beaches or tourists. Right away, we noticed how out of place we were. Walking through town, it felt like every set of eyes followed us. Not in a hostile way exactly, but with curiosity that quickly turned uncomfortable. We barely saw any other foreigners, which should have been a warning, but PS was glowing with excitement, and I went along with it. She could speak enough Croatian to get by, and I was picking up bits and pieces, but even then I couldn't shake a strange feeling. It was like stepping out of the bright, tourist-filled cities and into a place that didn't really want outsiders wandering its streets. That first day, we just wandered the streets, talking to locals and soaking up what felt like the real Croatian experience you don't get in tourist-heavy cities. PS could talk to anyone, and I wasn't exactly shy either, so we spent hours chatting with shopkeepers and random people we met. Everyone seemed polite and friendly, but I couldn't shake this strange feeling. The way some people stared at us, it wasn't just casual curiosity. Their eyes lingered too long, almost studying us. PS brushed it off, laughing like I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something about it felt off. On our second day, we wandered farther from the city center, looking for something more authentic. PS had heard about a small restaurant area from the woman at our Airbnb. Supposedly nothing fancy, just local spots known for great seafood. It was only a 15-minute walk, but the farther we went, the quieter it got. The busy sounds faded until we were narrow residential streets that felt almost too still. When we finally found the place, it didn't look like much, just a small building with a few tables and a handwritten menu taped to the window. But the second we stepped inside, the smell was unreal. Fresh fish, garlic, bread, it made my mouth water. We sat by the window and ordered way too much. Grilled fish, seafood pasta, bread, and even a bottle of local wine for €3. I remember thinking we'd struck gold. The food was incredible, better than anything we'd had in touristy restaurants, and it felt like we'd stumbled onto a secret spot. Still, as good as it all was, I couldn't shake this nagging thought in the back of my head, that being so far from the busy part of town might not be as safe as it felt in the moment. At some point during the meal, I realized a group of 5 men had come in and taken a table just a couple spots behind us. They looked rough, the kind of guys you'd normally cross the street to avoid, but they seemed focused on their food, barely glancing our way. I was surprised I hadn't noticed them earlier, but I figured I'd just been too caught up in the amazing food in my conversation with PS, so I shrugged it off and went back to eating. The only thing that bugged me was how loud they were talking, their voices cutting through the small room. About halfway through our meal, everything shifted. PS suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on something over my shoulder. Her smile was gone, replaced with this tight, uneasy look that instantly made my stomach drop. Before I could even ask what was wrong, PS leaned across the table and whispered that we needed to leave immediately. Her tone wasn't playful or dramatic. It was sharp, urgent, and full of fear. I whispered back, confused, but she was already reaching for her purse.
She repeated herself, saying she was dead serious, and there was something in her voice that told me I shouldn't argue. P.S. wasn't the type to panic over nothing. She spoke the language, she knew the culture better than I did, and if she said we had to get out, then there was a reason. I grabbed a handful of Kuna bills and dropped them on the table, probably way more than the meal had cost, and followed her out. She walked fast, practically dragging me by the arm, her eyes locked straight ahead.
I kept waiting for her to explain, but she didn't say a word until we were outside on the quiet street. That's when I stopped her and demanded to know what was happening. She finally looked at me, her voice trembling, and told me she'd overheard the men talking. They weren't just chatting, they were making plans about us, plans about separating us, about her. She said they mentioned some guy named Luca who would know what to do, whoever that was. Her face had gone pale, and her voice broke as she admitted she couldn't even repeat some of the things she heard. But the message was clear. We were in danger, and we needed to get back to the crowded part of town right away. I tried telling her maybe they were joking, but she shook her head. She said they weren't talking about fantasies. They were talking about what they were going to do, like it was routine. That's when I made the mistake of glancing back. All 5 men were outside now, staring right at us. The second they saw me looking, they started moving in our direction. My stomach flipped. I grabbed P.S.'s hand and told her they were following. Without hesitation, she bolted, and I ran with her. This wasn't a jog, it was a full sprint back toward the city center. The problem was we were farther from downtown than I'd realized, and the streets between us and safety were quiet, empty blocks. Soon, I could hear footsteps behind us. I looked back and felt my blood run cold. All 5 were chasing us, not even pretending otherwise. Pure pursuit. It was terrifying. P.S. was faster than me, but adrenaline kept me close, lungs burning as we zigzagged through random streets, hoping we weren't running deeper into trouble. Every corner felt endless, but finally, after what felt like 10 minutes of non-stop running, we heard traffic, voices, and saw people ahead. The sight of the crowded streets was like oxygen. We weren't safe yet, but at least we weren't alone anymore. The men stopped chasing the second we reached the busy square. When I glanced back, they were 2 blocks away, just standing there, staring at us, but not moving closer. It felt like they knew they couldn't do whatever they had planned with so many people around. Both of us were out of breath, shaking, hearts racing. P.S. was crying a little, though she tried to hide it, and seeing her that terrified made everything sink in. We finally sat at a small cafe in the main square, trying to calm down and process what had just happened. That's when an older Croatian man at the next table leaned over and in careful English asked if we were okay. When we told the older man what had happened, he just shook his head and called us idiots. Not in a cruel way, but like he couldn't believe how naive we'd been. He warned that tourists should never wander around that part of the city, especially not obvious foreigners like us. When P.S. described the restaurant, his face grew more serious. What he told us made me dizzy. Apparently, we'd walked straight into a known hangout for local criminals, tied to an organized group in the area. He said we were lucky to have gotten out when we did, but things could have ended very badly. I asked if we should tell the police, but he only laughed and said nothing more. Then, he paid for his coffee and left. P.S. and I didn't stay long either. We went straight back to our Airbnb, shaken and exhausted. The rest of our trip was ruined. We barely left the room except to grab food nearby, counting down the hours until our flight. Looking back, I'm just grateful P.S. acted when she did. If she hadn't understood the language, or if she had hesitated even a little, I honestly don't know what would have happened. That day taught me how quickly a normal afternoon can turn into something life-threatening when you're far from home, in a place where you don't understand the rules. And I'll admit, I still feel stupid for being so casual about it. P.S. used to be fearless about traveling, but I know that day in Rijeka changed something for her. It definitely changed something in me.